So question number 1, were you born and raised in Hawaii? Question number 2, did you graduate from high school in Hawaii? And question number 3, when people ask you where you're from, do you say Hawaii? If you answer no to any of these questions, you're probably not a local. Okay, so who is considered a local in Hawaii? And I'm not talking about what it takes to be a Hawaii resident so you can get the 5% kamaina discount. I mean, what exactly does it mean to be local? Do you have to be born and raised in Hawaii? Do you have to live here for so many years? What about Native Hawaiians? And does being local even matter these days? Determining who is local and who isn't is kind of an overwhelming task. And so I asked myself, what would be the simplest way to make that determination? And I came up with the 3 questions that I asked earlier. And so I want to talk about why I think determining who is local matters and further unpack these 3 questions. And also, what do you think makes someone local in Hawaii? Please let me know in the comments below. Before moving on, I do want to acknowledge that there is a lot of history behind that term local. And I won't go into it here, but if you're interested, I provided a link to an article that talks about the first references to the term local back in the 1930s, and it's actually quite interesting. So there's this joke, maybe you heard it. How do you know someone is from Hawaii? Don't worry, they'll tell you. And I laugh because it's kind of true. Locals who were born and raised in Hawaii are very proud of that fact, and they will often let you know. It's one of the most important identifiers for locals. Psychologist Henry Tajfel talked about it in his social identity theory, where a person's sense of who they are is based on their group membership. And for locals, that membership, being a local from Hawaii, is attached to who they are, like an opihi on a rock, that even when they're not in Hawaii, it still holds strong. When I was on the mainland, this is how I introduced myself. Hi, my name is Chris and I'm from Hawaii. Those 2 facts were seemingly inseparable. Being local is also important because it provides me with group identification, which instantly connects me to so many people. I mean, if you ever ran into another local on the mainland and started talking story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So yes, who is local does matter, but probably less than most people think. And I'll get more into that at the end of the video. And as we tread into some touchy-feely waters here, I just want to remind people that I'm not the official judge of localness. This is just the perspective of one local who believes that no matter where a person comes from, everyone should be treated with aloha. Were you born and raised in Hawaii? This one is a big indicator if someone is local. I see this a lot in my comments. I was born and raised in Hawaii. And that's usually the first thing that the person says to then qualify the rest of their comment, which lets me and everyone else know that they're from Hawaii and know what they're talking about based on their experience living here. Likewise, you'll notice that people will sometimes call out the fact that they themselves weren't born and raised in Hawaii, as if to qualify their response, but in a different way. And why do you think they do that? Well, I think it's because they recognize the distinction between someone who is born and raised in Hawaii and someone who is not. And while some people would view their perspectives as less than, not me. So the born aspect of born and raised is pretty easy to determine. You're either born in Hawaii or not. But the raised part is a little tough to define. Does raised mean until the age of 18? Does it mean 10 years? What if you were born somewhere else but moved here at the age of 3 or 16? And this is where I take the person's word in however they answer this question. If they say, yes, I was born and raised in Hawaii, that's good enough for me. And I'm not gonna ask them how many years they were here or what hospital they were born at. Because being raised in Hawaii is unique. It means that the person was raised on local values, on things like trying to get along with others, generosity, friendliness, and the importance of family. It also means we probably share a lot of similar experiences growing up, from the toys that we played with, to the kind of foods that we ate, to the ways that we celebrate holidays. And all of this matters because it helps us identify who we are in the world around us. So, what school you in, grad? Okay, first of all, if you don't understand this question and think that people want to know what college you went to, you're not local. Sorry. This is probably the second most important thing that people want to know about you when they first meet you in Hawaii, after knowing what your name is. And why is that? Because Where you went to high school says a lot about you. Was it a rich school, poor school, rough school? I think it would be a really tough call to call yourself a local if you didn't graduate from a Hawaii high school. It may seem trivial, but I think going to high school in Hawaii serves as a way to make a connection because locals want to connect with each other. For example, let's say I meet someone new and I ask them what school they graduated from. If they say Campbell High School, well, I didn't graduate from there, but I know a few people who did. So to keep the conversation going, I'm gonna follow up and ask if they know my friends. And sometimes this gets a little weird because people will ask me if I know their friend, and I'll ask them when did their friend graduate, and it turns out to be like 10 years before me. So no, of course I don't know that person, but still, it's a way that we're trying to connect. So say what you will about the Hawaii education system, but those high school years in Hawaii are special. Not just with graduation and prom and late nights at Zippy's, but there are a lot of shared experiences that we locals go through even though we attend different high schools throughout the state. Graduating from a local high school says a lot about you and your connection to Hawaii. And likewise, if you don't graduate from a local high school, you kinda lose that connection. You lose that chance to know someone that others may know, and because Hawaii is such a small place, by not going to school here, you kind of set yourself apart. If I were to ask you where you're from, would you say Hawaii? If the answer is no, or you have to qualify it with some long explanation, well, originally I was born in Chicago and then my family moved to California. And then we visited Hawaii once and eventually my family moved here when I was 16. Yeah, then I wouldn't consider you local. And I think this comes down to when you are a local, you know it and there's no explanation needed. Again, if someone says, yes, I'm from Hawaii, I'm not gonna hold some investigation on their past because frankly, it shouldn't matter what I think or what anyone else thinks. If you consider yourself from Hawaii, then that's great, and that's something that no one can take away. It means that you have a special connection to the islands and a shared value system with other locals. All right, so what about those people who move here or retire here later in adult life? I mean, I know they want to be local too, right? And yes, they get the Kama'aina discount. But can they really say that they are from Hawaii? And if not, I would consider them a local resident, meaning someone who lives here but is not originally from here. And I'm not trying to make people feel unwelcome. In fact, some people may say that a discussion like this, local versus local resident versus tourist, is hurtful and creates division. And maybe it does for some people, but I think it categorizes people in a way that is reflective of real life and the glances and judgments that we make in that split second in the grocery store or on the street. Tajfeld identifies this in his stages of social identity theory: categorization, identification, and comparison. Again, I'm not saying that if you aren't a local, you are somehow a second-class citizen. I mean, there are definitely some locals who would say that. You know, they want to classify people as locals or not so they can justify treating people a certain way, which I think is terrible. Determining who is a local is supposed to be a fun discussion to have that identifies and celebrates our differences in the way that local people do. And I hope in the end, we collectively as a state treat everyone with aloha, no matter where they're from. I also wanted to acknowledge Native Hawaiians in this discussion of local. And I don't want to turn this into a political debate because that could get out of control. So all I'll say is that they have a very special connection to Hawaii and the land that transcends the terms of local resident, or whatever labels we happen to use. So those are my thoughts on what it means to be a local. Were you born and raised in Hawaii? Did you graduate from a Hawaii high school? If I asked you where you're from, would you say Hawaii? And I think that those questions should pretty much determine one's localness or not. And I'm sure that there are people out there who would disagree with me. And if you do, please let me know in the comments below how you would categorize if someone is local or not. And again, being local or not shouldn't really affect the way that we treat others. It doesn't matter if your family has been living here for generations or you just got off the plane yesterday. You're still a person, and aloha isn't reserved just for locals or people who look the same as you or think the same way that you do. It's my understanding that it's supposed to be for everyone. So please let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and Aloha.